everyone. I'm James Zervios, OAC Vice President of Marketing and Communications, and welcome back to another Pay It Forward, a special segment from the Obesity Action Coalition's Stop Weight Bias campaign. Very exciting today as we have with us Yvonne Bryant, Cardiometabolic Market Development and Partnership Lead for Novo Nordisk. Welcome, Yvonne. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm doing very well. Thank you for being here. And as you know, Novo is such a huge supporter of the Stop Weight Bias campaign, and we wanted to have a chance to talk to you a little bit more and learn more about what Novo Nordisk is doing in this area of weight bias to help stop a weight bias. And so before we dig in, tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Novo Nordisk as well.
Great, would love to. For those who don't know, Novo Nordisk is a global healthcare company, and we're inspired really by helping patients through our 100-year of heritage and really trying to pioneer scientific breakthroughs so we can drive change for people living with diabetes, obesity, and other serious chronic conditions. And we really to look beyond going to just thinking about the life-saving medications that we have, but it's also focusing on delivering a business solution that's both financially, environmentally, and socially responsible. And my role at the company is really focused around raising awareness to consumers, helping them to learn more about living with their conditions, helping them to learn how to advocate and stand for care, and empowering them to move forward. And then working with a lot of external partnerships, just like the OAC, to drive change and to work together to make a difference in this world.
And Yvonne, you and I have had the pleasure of working together now for quite a while, and we know that Novo Nordisk supports so much in the obesity space. But with this campaign specifically, this is a very unique campaign. It really focuses on this issue of weight bias. Why did Novo Nordisk find value in supporting something like this?
Honestly, we've recognized that as a company, it can't be one voice. Like, it cannot just be the Obesity Action Coalition. It cannot be just Novo Nordisk. That we have this commitment to working with partners who are all about advancing education and advocacy. And this Stop Weight Bias campaign touches upon three of the pillars that we like to focus in on. The first one is prevention. So looking at how do we build a healthier environment to improve health for individuals, right? And recognition is our second pillar, where we are trying to make sure that we are focused on fostering empathy for people living with obesity and making it a healthcare priority. And then the third area is care. And how do we ensure people with obesity have access to science-based and comprehensive care? And the Stop Weight Bias touches upon that in many different ways. And so it is really our honor to support the OAC in this efforts, because we believe that it's vital to shift that narrative that's happening in society today, and really trying to change mindset starts with focusing in on what people are believing and the perceptions and the thought process that they carry with them day in and day out. And it plays across so many different aspects of one's life. And so, we wanted to support the OAC because we believe that this dialogue is really important in trying to move the needle. You have to start with understanding, how do we come to the table? How do we show up as organizations, as people, as colleagues, as healthcare providers serving patients, as media producers when we're putting messages out there? And so this campaign is really key in trying to change and deliver information in a way that's impactful. So we wanted to be, one of the many at the table to support this ongoing effort.
And you talked about some really important components there, and I want to go back to for a second and talk about that care aspect, right? Because we know that when it comes to weight bias, one of the areas where people have reported weight bias the most is in that healthcare setting. Where someone is going to talk to a healthcare provider about their weight, but they're just sort of met with the continued message that we always hear of eat less and move more. We're really not talking about other options, and we're not really having that constructive dialogue that that people are looking for. Why do you think that healthcare and weight bias is such an important issue that we really need to address?
I think because when you look at where people go to when you're living with any condition, and specifically with obesity, that conversation is happening with your healthcare provider. And healthcare providers are people just like anybody else. And so we are also shaped by our upbringing, our experience, what we've been exposed to. And so in those conversations, there's a tendency for the bias to creep in. And at times we see that shows up in a way where people may feel like their concerns around the obesity they're carrying to be dismissed or not addressed. And we don't want anyone walking away feeling like it's your fault or you should be shamed or blamed for any of it. And I think if the place that most people go to seek help is with a healthcare provider, that is the place that we need to scratch the surface in. That is the area where it should feel judgment free. You should feel welcome. We should be thinking about how do we create an individualized plan for you, because no one person is the same in this case. But you have to start at this place of looking at how do we shift the way that healthcare is being administered so that it is equally fair. And that can only happen if when we are noting that that bias is creeping into healthcare, that we stop it. And really, that's why I think when we look at some of the efforts even Novo Nordisk is doing is we have a team that goes in to talk to healthcare providers and say, how do you have your office set up? Is it set up in a scenario and environment that is welcoming? Are the chairs in the appropriate size? Little things. Do you have gowns that are appropriate for everyone? How do you have and introduce a dialogue with someone that may feel very sensitive, right? They may have already been trying to address their weight for a period of time. And so you don't want to come in and be met with bias or assumptions that you're doing nothing, right? So how do we make sure that healthcare providers are in a place to understand that patient's journey and where they may have been before they even got to you? So it's really about trying to make sure that that change can happen so healthcare can be delivered in a way that's comprehensive, in a way that feels appropriate, because we want people to feel like they can do it.
So, Yvonne, we know that Novo Nordisk supports the Stop Weight Bias campaign, but what is it that Novo Nordisk is currently working on from an external perspective to help stop weight bias?
Great question. So we're also working with other organizations like the Creative Coalition, which is the nonprofit arm of the arts and entertainment industry, and they take on issues of public health. And one of those this year is obesity, and they're really trying to influence filmmakers and the writers and directors to bring light to the untold story of obesity. One of the things they were able to accomplish is really featuring the storyline of someone with obesity in a New Amsterdam episode, which was really cool. We're also working with organizations like the NFL Alumni Association, and they're really focused in on educating their 10,000 plus members, as well as the fans of the alumni community, around men not being afraid or shamed from seeking help and dealing with their weight. So these are two really, I would say, great initiatives, and that's the Huddle Up, Let's Talk Obesity campaign.
And I know that OAC has shared both of those campaigns on our social media, and we've actually talked about them on our OAC TV broadcast as well. And you know, the NFL Alumni Association one is always interesting to me because here you have these men that in this profession, size, you know, being a person of size is a beneficial thing to them when you think about what they're doing and what they're trying to accomplish on the field day in and day out. But then, as we've heard a lot of times from professional athletes, the career is over and normal life sets back in. And they're dealing with these issues of weight and obesity, and they're looking for places for help, right? And to have that conversation. And so you think about that where they're fighting that stigma as well, where they're wanting to have that conversation, but it's also still living in that world of being a bigger person and commanding, you know, that type of respect or responsibility for that role that you once filled as a professional athlete.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that are key that you were kind of touching upon there is the fact that life has changed. And genetically, the makeup of who they are, height and body wise, still exists. And what we've heard from some of their members is that as we've surveyed them, as they've gone on later in life, they start to experience some of those comorbidities associated with obesity that they hadn't had before. And so those things start to creep in. And so we really want to break down that stigma of you can get care and you can get help. And just because you're a man, don't be afraid to say, I need to focus in on it. You're doing it for yourself, you're doing it for your family. And we've seen a great response from just even the testimonials that comes from the individuals who are speaking up about it to say, you know what, you're right, I needed to make a shift and a change. And again, you know, dealing with obesity is an individual's journey. But through this conversation that we're trying to foster, it's normalizing the idea that you can talk about your weight and you don't have to feel like you have to battle it alone. So it's really great for trying to elevate those conversations as well in the community of men. Gender bias is also something that comes into play when you look at healthcare, when you look at other aspects of bias.
Yeah, I think you hit on something so important there with that narrative of obesity, where so often we find that people think of obesity as very much an issue that's just about personal responsibility, and there's no other factors at play. And we know that OAC and Novo Nordisk work very hard to really debunk that narrative and to explain to people that obesity is a very, very complex issue, and it's not just a disease of personal responsibility. I think, unfortunately, weight bias very much reinforces that in all settings of life for someone with obesity. So we know that we find weight bias in healthcare, employment, education, and even we saw this in the surveying that we did for Stop Weight Bias, especially in interpersonal and family relationships. We know that weight bias is very, very prevalent. So to hear that all of these things are going on, and especially behind the scenes, and the efforts that your organization and your company is taking to train internally, but then also influence that messaging externally as well, just goes to show the commitment that Novo Nordisk has when it comes to stopping weight bias, and we very much appreciate that work.
Thank you. And I want to add to something you just mentioned as well when you talk about the many factors that are involved with obesity. And we do feel is our obligation to share those many factors, right? Because it's not necessarily just one thing. So we try to focus heavily in on some of the science that we understand, right? Whether it's appetite and hormones, like what contributes to obesity, because I think there's even this lack of understanding there, which is why people think it's a matter of willpower or it's an individual's fault. So in all that we do, we try to educate on the many factors so that people can understand why they're seeing or thinking what they think and why it's not actually true. We have to give that knowledge. We have to share that information for people to learn and to grow and to begin to think differently.
Well, Yvonne, it definitely sounds like Novo Nordisk is doing a lot in addition to supporting the Stop Weight Bias campaign when it comes to really chipping away at this very important and serious issue of weight bias. As always, it's been a pleasure talking with you. I want to thank you for your time today. And if you'd like to learn more, for those of you tuning in, you can visit stopweightbias.com. We have other pay it forward videos up there as well. And you can also learn more about the campaign and be part of the solution. We thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much.